And we get to welcome my co-host, K-lub, who is joining us for Secular Soapbox. So,
hello, everybody.
K-lub, we were just discussing, how everybody was raised, if they were raised religious or not, and did they extend that onto their children. So you have a kid.
Yes, I do. Very, very lucky to have the child that I do.
Awesome sauce. So how old is your little guy?
He's going to be turning 6 in July.
6 years old.
He is now, and we have to change our language because he's forced us to. He just graduated, so he is now a kindergartner, even though he's never set foot in class.
What are your thoughts about raising your child with religious beliefs? I'm assuming as a secular couple that religion is not really involved in your parental style, but has your kid asked questions about religion, or how do you deal with that?
Well, as a matter of fact, of late, I'd say this is a very recent phenomenon, mind you. At most 2 or 3 months, he's been coming to me, telling me about God, and I'm like, really? So do you actually think that God is real? And he's like, yeah, I believe God's real. And so my son actually does believe that God is real. And I think that this is just because of the culture we live in at the moment. Like, he's just inundated with religious material. Because I'm not teaching him that God's real. And he has very little interaction with family members that shove that sort of thing down his throat either. So
is this something that you think he's picked up in school?
Perhaps. I think that's a possibility, but I think honestly, the most interaction that he has with the outside world is through YouTube, and he has his own YouTube account, and he spends, I'd say, roughly an hour and a half, maybe 2 hours a day,
really,
on YouTube, between the computer and the tablet. So that's like where he gets most of his outside in information. But he's mostly just watching children's material. But somehow through this, I don't know how. I honestly make sure that what he's watching isn't gratuitous by any means. I want to make sure that it's kid friendly. And so far as I can tell, it's friendly enough. And I don't care if what he's watching is religious either. And I also don't care that my son thinks that God is real either. Because he's constantly coming to me, and I'll say something like, here's a silly example. I told him that amongst all the other stuff that was behind the shed were some witch bones. And he's like, witches aren't real. And I was like, so he does this sort of thing all the time with XYZ isn't real. And he does this with aliens, ghosts, with pretty much everything that we would think of as paranormal. And for whatever reason, and I've actually tried asking him a little bit about what it is he means by God. And it's very childlike, as you might imagine. He thinks that God is just this person that's up there that makes sure that that watches everybody.
He's an invisible man in the sky who watches everything, right?
But that archetype is like just bleeding throughout culture. So I mean, he probably soaks it in from every direction, a little bit here and a little bit there, I would imagine.
Yeah. And he does. It is slightly encouraged by our family. They know that Heather and I are very secular, especially myself. So they don't really press the issue too hard. So I honestly do believe that most of it is just inundated from YouTube. Because that's just what it is.
So I had a roommate a few years ago. He's actually a really good friend of mine now, but we were in the military together. We were both in the Air Force together. But he was a kid when I first met him. He was like 19 and in the military. And he was very interesting to me because he came from a super religious background, but he didn't know a lot about pop culture. He didn't know a lot about movies, music. And he told me one day, growing up, he wasn't allowed to listen to secular music because they didn't have that in his house. And so things we would be listening to the radio are like pop top 40 radio with, or artists that anyone would know, and he wouldn't know anything about that. And it just seemed so strange to me, who I was also raised religious, but not to that, super conservative like that. And now when I look at him, now I won't use his name, obviously, but he's totally, not only is he not religious at all, but he went like in the opposite direction for a little while, like completely wild, so to speak. I'll leave it there. And I think it had to do, and we've talked about it, but I definitely think it had to do with the fact that he was shielded or sheltered from a lot of the real world and just the normality of what normal kids grow up with due to his religious upbringing. And I always thought that was unfortunate because like I always viewed it as kind of harmful, like stifling someone's development. But I don't know if some religious parents would feel compelled to do that. I know in certain religious denominations in particular, they are not supposed to be involved in worldly things. So what do you guys think about that? Do you think, I'll start with you, Laura. Do you think that people that are raised in strict religious households suffer social development issues? Or
I think what you said brought two things to mind. And the first thing was when you say like the indoctrinated where you have to believe versus the just dangling the good bits and pieces and making it shiny. Mm-hmm. I think when you do that where you make something really, really strict and then they see something else or something different, that new different thing becomes kind of more appealing almost by default, right? So I think part of it does have to do like maybe, and I don't know him and I don't know his story, so I could be dead wrong here. But it seems to me like with the religious people that I knew who were raised more sheltered and more closed off versus the religious people that I knew who were raised really like more liberally, they did the same thing. They had this sort of like flip 180 phase where they're like partying all the time, going out and like casually dating and doing all this stuff that was like exactly opposite of what their parents taught. Mm-hmm. And it almost felt to me like they were not rebelling, like trying to be a bad person, but rebelling like I'm now able to express myself, so I'm going to express myself to my fullest, if that makes any sense. And then I think the other thing is what you were talking about when you were talking about not being exposed to stuff, right? So when you're raised with pop culture, with different social, I don't know, occurrences or different social practices, and they're just kind of normalized, then it's not a big deal. And then when you're raised to not even know about them at all in the first place, or to know about them but think that they're bad, then when you finally start learning about them, I almost wonder if there's like this intriguing, like intense interest, like, ooh, I never knew this existed, or ooh, I was taught this was bad, but this doesn't seem so bad, right? And there's this sort of intense desire to participate or partake in it.
Right. I see Sonny nodding over there. What do you have to say about that, Sonny?
I completely agree with Laura. I've seen kids who, and I was thinking about the first time I was in college in Florida. I had a roommate who had been raised by very fundamental religious parents who sheltered her from everything. And then all of a sudden, bam, she's in a dorm room with 3 other girls. And they were set up more like apartments. And so the guys were right across from us. And so there was all kinds of shenanigans going on all the time. And she was completely green. I mean, she had not been exposed to anything, and she went off the rails, completely off the rails. Way more than, well, it was.
So what you're saying,
for her, actually.
What you're saying is she turned into a hoe.
Well, I don't think that there is such a thing as a hoe.
I know. I think sexual expression should not be so negatively categorized.
Yeah. That's interesting.
Maybe
Not to derail it, but it's interesting that you guys both said that, because I actually think it should be a benign thing that people should own, and I don't see why it's even bad. So, but I guess that's 2 different takes on it. Ultimately, I think we're saying the same thing. We're just saying it in a different way. Yeah. You're saying that the word has the stigma associated with it, and so probably shouldn't be used. And I'm looking at it that we can take it back, but I don't know which one is true.
Well, I think it has a particularly negative connotation for women. Mm-hmm. Because men, it was they were sowing their wild oats. They were conquering.
They were being men.
Being guys. Yeah. And girls, we couldn't win for losing, especially and. Bryce, I'm a little bit older than you, and so we found that out the last time. Yeah. So when I was growing up, it was really, really hard because, and a teenager, because you either were a cold fish who was a tease,
Yeah, a prude.
or there was no in between.
Mm.
Yep.
And it didn't matter what you did, you were gonna, you just couldn't win for losing. So I think that's why probably Laura and I both had that immediate reaction, because it's a very different thing for women in particular, especially women of my age growing up in that era. And
Well, you
that's
guys are both in luck today because we are on secular soapbox right now. We're not on the Bryce is Right, and I can
And the
actually
price
be
is
wrong here. Yeah, I admit I can fully be wrong here. I don't admit that on my other show, but
No, but
which is
think-
why I'm not on that show.